Hey, this is the first video I'm going to be doing for the channel. It's about range of motion and how to increase your range of motion. So a few things to mention first. Obviously, having good range of motion is incredibly important in any kind of sport to prevent injuries and be able to move better. And by having that fluidity of movement, you're going to be much more spontaneous. So you don't want to only be able to throw one kind of technique from a certain position. But I think especially in terms of martial arts, what people tend to lack is they'll focus upon the lower flexibility because it's obvious you need that to be able to perform high kicks and things like that. But if they've neglected other things like lower back, for instance, and upper flexibility, then that can really inhibit how you move further down the line, especially if you're doing things like spinning kicks in which you need to be really loose to be able to throw them quickly. So while obviously having a good level of flexibility is really important so that you don't get injured and you're able to perform well, don't let anybody tell you that you need to be able to perform splits to be able to do good kicks with good technique, because you don't.
Because of my big legs and karate, I can do the splits no problem.
So we've all seen those martial arts guys who've got incredible flexibility and can, do things like over splits on blocks and all that sort of stuff. And they can put their leg up and hold it in the air and everything, but they've got no power or no snap or no intention, should I say, behind any of their moves. And then you've got the guys on the other hand who focused only on power and have neglected to become flexible. And all they can do is kind of like charge forward with force, which you don't want either.
I'm the juggernaut, bitch!
So it's about having a nice balance. You want to be able to be flexible enough to perform the moves you want, but then also have the muscle strength to be able to deliver power behind the attacks. So the different types of flexibility that we're going to be focusing on here are dynamic flexibility and static flexibility. Dynamic flexibility is basically where you move a joint through its kind of entire range of motion or work up towards doing that. I find it gets you really, really loose, and then you can kick much more fluidly, and you can also stay much more relaxed, which is super important for developing speed as well. And static flexibility or stretching is basically where you hold a muscle in an uncomfortable but bearable position for a period of time, say 10 to 30 seconds is usually the recommended amount. Dynamic stretching is to be done before a training session, and static stretching is to be done after a training session when you're nice and warm, or you can do it later on. Some people do it after having a warm bath so that their muscles are nice and loose as well. I find it astonishing the amount of people who are considered high-level martial arts instructors who kind of really should know better, who prescribe static stretching before an intense workout. If you do that, it can actually make your muscles too relaxed. Remember me talking about those neurological safeguards? And you can accidentally go beyond your limits and injure yourself. And you can also get things like tendinitis as well, I've heard, from doing it. I personally do static stretching in the evening times. I don't really find it beneficial to do it after training, and I never ever get injured. The only time I've ever got injured, like I said before, is when I neglected static stretching altogether and then went and did full force kicks, and I got pulled groin by doing that. Which is really annoying because you can't train properly for ages and it takes a long time to heal. So make sure you don't neglect your static stretching at the right times though. The reason that we do have to stretch is because we have these safeguards that are built into our brain that activate the counter muscle antagonists when the muscle we're stretching is getting close to reaching its maximum range of motion. This is obviously to prevent injury so that we don't just do something way beyond our normal range of motion and pull a muscle. It's more about relaxing into the movement slowly over time and with consistency to be able to get to that maximum range of motion. I will tell you that I find stretching incredibly boring, and it's something I never really like to do, but I kind of force myself to do it through just discipline basically. I like to be moving quickly and doing dynamic things, so I find stretching quite boring just to sit down and not really do much. That leads me to my next point, which is that it's super important to also maintain a level of flexibility throughout your sporting activity training, whatever you're doing. If you're training in something and you're kind of really familiar with a type of technique, it can actually be way more dangerous if you neglect flexibility from that point. That's because you can almost force yourself into that position regardless of what your muscle antagonists are saying. I've done this before because, like I say, I don't really like to stretch, and because I'm used to doing the certain types of techniques, I can kind of force my body into those positions and past those safeguards, so you want to be really careful with that. So now we're going to go to some footage of me warming up in the gym a little bit. So as you can see here, firstly, I'm just moving my feet around, doing some kind of little crisscross motions with my feet, just to warm up my legs and get a bit of a sweat on, warm the ankles up and things like that. So next I will warm up by doing some basic kind of footwork and shifting a little bit. You also notice here I am doing these direction changes, which is a really good way of activating your core, I find. If you're going to do these, make sure that your core is nice and tight and your body's all shifting as one unit, so your legs aren't leaving behind your upper body. It's really good for your legs, and it'll also teach you to be nice and loose while also moving quickly. This is also quite good for your coordination and speed as well. So after I'm a little bit warmed up, I will start to do the actual dynamic stretches. What I'm basically doing is swinging my arm in a figure of 8 pattern. Try to keep your shoulders quite straight and just let the arm swing loosely. I find after doing this that I feel a lot more fluid when I move. So this one's really similar to the other one. If you notice how I'm swinging my arms round again in big circles, nice and loose. In the figure of 8, my body moved a little bit more with my arm, but this one you want to try to keep your shoulders square and just let the arm do the work. Holding that other hand up nice and straight will stabilize you a little bit with that as well. So this next one I'm doing here is a little bit more like an active stretch. It doesn't look like much, but it really opens out the hips if you do it correctly. The main thing that you want to watch out for, and if you can notice from these clips here, is the way I keep my body at the same level throughout the movement. If you manage to do that, you'll really feel an opening of the hips as you pass through that central point. So we're moving on to the actual dynamic leg swings now that I spoke about earlier. These are the front leg swings. I stand in a really generic sort of stance, and then I take the back leg and swing it up straight as high as it can go, and also pull the toes of the swinging leg back as well for an extra stretch on the calf. Try to keep your hips square and avoid the tendency to lay your body down against the leg. These next ones are very similar, but they're more of a crescent kick variation, going in more of an inside to outside circular motion. These will open up your hip a little bit more and create that good square front flexibility. So now we're going to move on to the rear leg swings. If you notice here, I'm actually using the wall in front of me as assistance to balance. This is actually a little bit high for my height, but you want to try to lean on something like a wall or a ledge just above where your waist height is. So what you want to do with these is take the kicking leg, and if you notice how I put it slightly more in front of me before I swing it, that's just to gain a little bit of momentum, and it helps the leg to go up a little bit higher as well. If you noticed here how I'm doing my best to keep my body completely square. The tendency for your hips here is to open out slightly and become more of a turned hip position, but you want to try to keep your body as square as possible because we're targeting a different muscle for this stretch. Alright, now we're moving on to the Psyche Variation. Make sure that the standing foot is facing towards the wall or the thing that you're leaning on. So it'll be basically that your heel is facing towards your kicking target. However, this time as I swing the leg up, I'm going to look towards the kick as I would in a side kick position, and I'm going to swing the leg up with my hips turned. The most common error I see people make with this is allowing their toes of their kicking foot to go higher than their heel. Now if that happens, it actually becomes more like a front swing instead of a side swing, and you'll be losing the benefit of this type of stretch. So basically after doing these dynamic stretches, what I usually like to do is just go and loosely play around doing some light kicks on the back and playing around with a little bit of footwork. It's nothing too serious, we're not trying to apply power, we're just getting used to moving and loosening off the body. I always find that when I do this, it doesn't seem like I'm doing much, but when I actually come to kicking hard or hitting hard later, I always feel a lot better and like I'm able to apply my energy much better. So I usually probably will do this for 3 to 5 minutes, but sometimes if I get into it, I'll stay doing this for like 10 to 15 minutes, just playing around with different things and having fun with it, getting nice and loose and warm. Okay, so now moving on to the static stretching. As you can see, I've done some training, I'm nice and sweaty, and this is a good time to do your static stretching because your muscles are nice and loose, they've just been used. Now this first stretch is the butterfly stretch. I like to sit against something when I'm doing this. That's because I find that if I don't sit against something, my body tends to slide out and I lose the alignment. What you want to do is get your feet to touch each other and bring them as close into your pelvis as possible. If you're not that flexible already, you probably won't be able to get your legs in that far. I like to usually grab my ankles and pull them in to make sure they're aligned. Remember, static stretching is supposed to be uncomfortable but not painful, so don't push too hard and injure yourself. The next one is a classic Bock split stretch. If you notice here, I'm wearing these socks, and that's because I find it way easier to slide down and get into the right position. If you notice here, I go down into it in a certain way which isn't exactly in the alignment of the stretch, and then when I feel I'm at my maximum position, I will slightly shift my weight forwards to make sure that my body's nice and aligned and straight and my feet will flatten onto the ground. A common error with this one that you want to watch out for is that your butt doesn't go back and too far out of alignment. It's okay to go down into this shape and then shift afterwards, so make sure that you get into a straight line. You can do this yourself at home by having a mirror placed at your side, getting into position and then looking into the mirror to see if your hips are aligned. So those are a couple of static stretches that you can do, and in future videos I'll be able to go into much greater detail and show you some much more in-depth stretching as well. And finally, these are a couple of yoga style stretches that I do. These can either work after the main static stretching part, or you can do it before because they're not that stressful on your muscles. So if you noticed here, I'm in a kind of elongated walking stance. This is really good for stretching the hip flexor, which is something that gets really used when we're kicking. I'll take one of my hands and place it down on the ground. It doesn't matter which one because you want to do this both ways. And I'll take the other hand and I'll stick it up in the sky and stretch my fingers out. You want to try to keep your body as straight and aligned as possible during this. So imagine that your chest is sandwiched between two panes of glass that aren't too far apart from each other. And this stretch is really good for front flexibility, stretching the hamstrings as well as the calves. You want to try to keep both legs as straight as you can on this one. If you notice here how I lean my body down to the leg, but I'm using my chest to lead, not actually with my head. Because if you just bend at the neck, it can appear like you're really leaning down on that leg, but you're actually not, because there's a big gap between your head and your chest, and there's a lot more of a stretch that you could actually do if you were correctly aligned. If you like this video and found value in it, please subscribe to the Bioneer and follow me across all social media platforms. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.